Good evening. Hello, everybody. Yes, so I am Nawal Houghton, and I go by sort of my, thing that I do. It's called Your Divorce Coach. And I am a solicitor. I'm also a mediator. And I bring all of those skills to become a divorce coach. A lot of people ask me, why aren't you just a divorce lawyer? Point is, there's loads of those out there, and that's not actually what people need, and certainly not in the realms of narcissism. So I specialize actually in helping men and women divorce toxic narcissistic personalities. And people work with me through coaching. I do one-on-one sessions. I see clients before, middle, after, years after a divorce, even if you haven't been married to them, just having to learn how to manage them if you have children with them is also something that I really help with. I've got an absolute passion for helping those that have children with a narcissist and helping those children manage having a narcissistic parent. I often say to my clients, helping you separate from or manage the narcissist is fantastic in that, I've kind of allowed you to leave that scope, but the child still has a narcissistic parent, and what it's like for that child to have to manage their own parent and someone who they essentially love is something that I'm really passionate about helping and empowering my clients to empower their children. So apart from one-on-one coaching, I also offer SOS sessions, just in case you wanted a one-off session in order to get some advice about a specific point. Yes, so as Tam said, you can find me on Instagram. I'm there with my daily content and stories. She'll give you the details after that. And if you wanted to get in touch with me just to find out how to work with me, I offer a free 15-minute discovery call. So tonight, normally we do a Q&A, which we're going to do afterwards as well. But what I wanted to do very briefly at the beginning was to give you some tips on how to manage the narcissist in your life, whether it be he or she. And it's just some general tips, whether you're in a separation process, a divorce process, or out of all of that. I think one of the big factors that my clients sort of say to me is, I thought it was all going to be over once the divorce was done, or once sort of the consent order was done with children if you weren't in a marriage. And the harsh truth is no. That's not always the end at all, I'm afraid. Narcissists have a desire to keep controlling you, even if they have new supply. You are something that they owned, and they always want to remind you that they are more powerful and can have you back and sort of have a connection with you. So I'm hoping that these tips will help you if you find yourself in that situation. So the first tip I sort of would like to give you is profiling. Profile the narcissist. I often call the narcissist the NEX, and I'll probably use that throughout, so it's far shorter and far quicker. NEX stands for Narcissistic X, and that's a terminology I use on my stories. So profiling, what does that mean? It's not really sufficient just to say that they're narcissistic, and it's probably not even that detailed to say that they are either covert or overt. Covert, what does that mean? It means that their narcissism is somewhat subliminal. It's very sort of under the bar. It'd be very difficult for you to describe to somebody what narcissistic acts they were doing. If you try to sort of explain, oh, they kind of very difficult, and sometimes they don't allow me to go out, and it's all these sort of small minor things. In your world, collectively, they amount to sort of narcissism, but when describing it, it's quite difficult. That's almost like an indicator of covert narcissism. Overt is more grandiose, in your face, quite arrogant, physical violence, and verbal abuse is probably one of the big indicators of that. So one of the things that I say is you need to dig a little bit deeper than that. So for instance, there's sort of a category with covert and overt narcissists. Covert narcissists, you might find that they are charitable, community, victim narcissists. And there are sort of certain attributes about that. And as well as sort of grandiose, it kind of depends what type of grandiose they can fall into. Now, why profile them? Yeah, what benefit does that give me? Well, when you are managing a narcissist, it's really important to find out your profile so that you know how to manage primarily your communication with them. For instance, if you have got a covert victim narcissist, your correspondence has to almost mirror their language. So if you are trying to be quite aggressive with them or tell them things are quite unfair and they themselves play that victim narcissist role, it's not really going to work. There's a certain way of managing your communication with them. So, and lots of other sort of aspects as well. If you're managing them in a divorce or a separation, profiling them really helps you strategize and learn how to manage them. And that is something that I do with my clients. So that's number one, is really profile them, get to know. The best way to profile them is look at their past behavior and see if you can find a theme of what they were doing. Number two, second hint is break the spell and stop focusing on them. One of the things I think we find ourselves doing when we're going through this process that's really difficult is that we focus so much on what the narcissist is doing, whether they've moved on, have they got a new supply, how they're sort of bad-mouthing you, who they're talking to, what they're putting on social media. All of that, let go of. That's them trying to control the narrative. One of the key things that a narcissist does when they're with you is not only have they profiled you, but they absolutely know everything that makes you tick, how you work, what your weaknesses are, where your strengths are. They almost start to analyze you the moment they met you. In fact, they strive towards you for a particular reason. One of the big factors is you're probably empathetic and a people pleaser, super empath. There was a reason they were sort of came towards you, as it were. So them sort of putting on social media or acting how they are, they know that that will trigger you in some way. And it's very natural to feel very frustrated about what the narcissist does, but really learn to let go. They're not as important as you imagine them to be in your mind, and they actually don't have any power unless you give it to them. And that's quite a big statement, and it probably does need some breaking down. But what I'm talking about here is they can only really upset you or cause that effect on you if you almost allow them to. And it's absolutely true that you need to go through trauma recovery, etc., but they're just not as powerful as you think they are. So yeah, top tip number two would be to just stop focusing on what they're doing. Don't worry too much about their narrative and just concentrate on you, your strategy, and your goal. Number three, set clear boundaries and consequences. So this is a massive favourite one of mine. And I still find it surprising the number of people that I talk to that probably say something along the lines of, oh, I told him and her this, but they still sort of did it. And, oh, I'm quite frightened about what they might do. Just in case, the consequence for me. And then I often ask them, okay, so what's your boundary? Have you told them that if they do A, B will happen? No. And that is essentially a very natural consequence of being with someone narcissistic, because they've basically crushed all your boundaries. Any boundaries that perhaps you had at the beginning of a relationship, they certainly learn to crush down by the end of it. You've probably been taught the consequences of having a boundary, probably given the silent treatment. They could have been some sort of physical or verbal abuse, but you were taught very early on that having any type of boundary wasn't allowed. So one of the key things that you need when you manage that narcissist is having a boundary. Now that could be something physical. It could be when you come and pick up the children, I'd like you to stay out of the house. You're in front of the door, not come in, enter the drive, whatever your specific things are. Or it could be finance. It could be the maintenance you're supposed to give me needs to be paid as said in the court order on the first day of the month, etc. That's great, having that boundary, and set it, and don't be afraid to set your boundary. But there has to be a consequence, because just giving them that phrase, they don't really care. And when I say consequence, it means saying if you do or don't do this, I will have to X. But don't give them a consequence that you won't actually follow through with. It has to be real. It has to not be calling their bluff. Don't do what they do. They're very good at calling your bluff. Don't do the same thing. You really have to say, if you keep crossing into my home when you pick up the children, next time I will have to call the police. You say it once, and when they do that, you effectively do call the police. So set up a consequence that you realistically are going to be able to follow through with. And that can apply to any aspect. Number 4, expect them to push back. Any sort of demonstration by you of displaying sort of autonomy, and what do I mean by that? Jumping out of the little box that they have sort of created for you. That's how narcissists ultimately function. They've got you in a little box and you're supposed to stay there, and you can't do anything outside of that box because it makes them feel safe. Because that's what narcissism is, by the way. Their desire to control is because they are essentially have very low self-esteem, and they need to control things in order to make them feel better. So when they've got you safely in that box, that makes them feel good. The minute you start to create a boundary with a consequence, or perhaps you've initiated divorce proceedings, or maybe you want child arrangements set out quite clearly with a narcissist, that's you acting outside of that box, and that absolutely petrifies them. But a narcissist demonstrates their fear through anger, and they will retaliate. And so that is them pushing back. I often say in a divorce, a narcissist will mainly weaponize 2 big things: children and money. And the reason people work with a divorce coach is, I can tell you, sometimes the client will ring me up saying, I don't know what's happened. You know, he or she has gone absolutely crazy with child arrangements. They're not listening to anything. They're not going to see them, or now they want changes. I can't handle all the emails. And one of my first questions I'll say is, how's finances going? And then my client might say, oh, actually, yeah, there's been a really big sort of discovery, or they're going to have to give disclosure. So what effect happens is, if something isn't working well in one area, they will retaliate in the other. And managing that narcissist is expecting that. So expect them to retaliate. If something isn't going well in children, they'll retaliate with money. So just focus on the fact that those are essentially those 2 big almost channels that they will use. And the reason people use me as a divorce coach is because I've got great visibility on both, and I know exactly where they're going to go. So I often say, or I prep my clients, and I'll say, look, if you're talking to your solicitor about, you know, forcing disclosure or initiating financial proceedings, something's going to happen in children, and wait for it. And sometimes clients say to me, oh, actually, it's been quite quiet, it's been fine. And then catastrophe, it'll arrive. So just expect them to push back somehow. If they're being nice, be even more wary. They'll just push back when you're least expecting it. Number 5, find a good support system. And more fundamentally than that, really, is recognize when you need help. I think a lot of us will try and think that you can manage everything on your own, that really, you know, you'll be fine. I think a lot of us will say that a lot of the time. I'll be fine, I can manage it. Managing someone narcissistic is so incredibly draining. Just the other day on my stories on Instagram, I asked a very simple question. I said, how many of us feel completely and utterly emotionally exhausted by managing the sort of brain power that it takes, the physical attributes, and everybody responded so highly. It is so exhausting. Second guessing them, trying to figure out what they're going to do next, just being dragged through the court system, the potential parental alienation techniques that they might use on our children, causing havoc everywhere, bombarding us with whether it be emails or text messages, to the point where we just almost feel like breaking down. And that is exactly their aim. They bombard you. They want you to feel so completely overwhelmed that essentially you give up. And you see that both in children matters and also those of finances. So find your support system, whether it be something like Frollo. I think there is a channel for those that are going through narcissistic sort of divorces or dealing with narcissistic personalities, isn't there, Tam? So find that support network. Facebook group, I have one, I have 2. It's absolutely free to join. The links are in my Insta profile. There's one for men, there's one for women, because I appreciate that sometimes you want to keep those things sort of separate. A good solicitor, if you can afford it. A divorce coach also, if funds sort of allow. You know, family and friends are great, don't get me wrong, and they're there for a different type of support. But in terms of learning how to manage that narcissist, you do need that professional help. And a little bit of help does go a long way. I mean, I'm hoping even tonight, getting these tips and techniques will help you in some way. And I think my last tip is going to be a particular parenting one. Learn to parallel parent. I think that a lot of us have this hope that, you know, maybe you'll be able to parent with this sort of narcissist, that really fundamentally, how can they not love our children or our child in the way that we do? And that's probably one of the biggest things to grasp, actually, that narcissists don't love children in the same way as we do. They see them as extensions of themselves. They see them as a form of supply, and eventually the roles will reverse where they will expect the child to look after them. You'll probably hear narcissists talk about their children in ways of things that they do as opposed to who they are, you know, whether they're kind and generous and loving. It'll be more about, oh, you're fast, you're quick, you're smart, you're beautiful, you're good looking, you're intelligent, most popular. And so trying to co-parent with them will only be met with disaster, simply because it's either their way or no way. What does parallel parenting mean? It effectively is, as it says on the box, it's kind of just going down your own channel. I mean, certainly there'll be some elements of information that you need to provide to each other. Can't guarantee that the narcissist will provide it to you, but you should always model that good behaviour, if anyone, but for your children. So things like advising them of health concerns, school reports, etc. But it's pretty much functioning as a solo parent in a way, with just dipping in and out of certain information that they need. And sort of with that notion of understanding that it really is impossible to co-parent with a narcissist, because, as I said, it's their way or no way at all, is probably one more tip I'm going to squeeze in, and that is the real form of acceptance. This is probably another big thing that I explain to those that come and sort of work with me. Really accepting a narcissist for who they are, which really, when you drill down to the bottom, means letting go of any sense of reasonableness that you think that they may have, number one. Number two, thinking that any form of counselling may change them. You know, it's not unheard of. There have been reports of some narcissists going to seek counselling, but they are who they are. You can't change them. It's not something that you can reverse. It's a personality disorder. So you have to really accept that that is who you're dealing with. You're dealing with someone that has a lack of empathy, someone that will manipulate, control, want everything in their own way, does not take responsibility for any of their actions, is incredibly grandiose or very malicious and manipulative and covert. Let go of any, oh, but when I met them, they were really nice and they were reasonable then, so it must be there somewhere. It's not. Any amount of reasonableness that you saw at the beginning of a relationship or even in the middle was fake. It wasn't true. And this is another really hard part of seeing them for who they really are and accepting them for who they are. That persona that they projected to you was also fake. I have clients that sort of say to me, when he or she was with me, they hated whether it be a type of food or activity or you know, going to certain countries, and suddenly with a new person, they're doing the total opposite. And that just goes to compound that notion of they're chameleon-like. They mold into whatever you needed in front of you in order to sort of fall for them. They mirror back exactly what your needs and wants are. And as we are in sort of that love stage of a relationship, we're very vocal about what we like and what we don't like and our needs and our wants. And all the narcissist is just doing, male and female, is portraying back to you exactly what you desire, so that you then ultimately fall in love with them and they are then able to secure their supply. So any sort of I don't know, imagination or thought process that you have about them, it's all fake, it's not real. The person that they really are is the narcissist that you're dealing with right now in the most difficult way. That is who they are. That's the real them, irrespective of the image that they portray to others. So those are kind of like my 6 or 7 tips, kind of high level. I could go in so much more, but I also find it's a bit mind-boggling sometimes just to sort of take all of that information in. But yeah, so those are there. I'm going to run through them again very quickly. So number one, profile them as much as you can. Look at your history and see what they were like, see sort of red flags, identify red flags, even the ones that you chose to ignore. And if we all are honest with ourselves, we would have ignored some of those red flags. Number two, break the spell, kind of, stop focusing too much on them, focus on yourself. What is your strategy? What is your journey? Number three, set those clear boundaries, and the consequence, a boundary is useless if you don't implement a consequence. Don't just say it, but you have to be able to enforce it. Expect them to push back in whatever way. They weaponize those two channels we spoke about, which is going to be children and finances. Find your support network. It's great that you've got friends and family, but find people that truly will empower you to manage this particular person in your life for however long you need to manage them. Then there's parallel parenting. There's one more thing I want to add to parallel parenting. I get a lot of clients that say, I'm going to go no contact. That's the best way. I've Googled it. I've Googled narcissism, and no contact is the best way. You cannot go no contact when you have a child. It is impossible. You have to go what I call low contact, which means keeping your responses really factual, stripping that emotion out of it, and learning when to reply as and when necessary. That is sort of something else that I help my clients with in terms of communication. We sort of develop this very organic way of working together where they'll draft a response to the next, and I will kind of redraft it back. And it's through doing that kind of few times that you end up by picking up a way of responding. Don't forget, if you are going low contact, especially in parallel parenting with a narcissist, communication is the only way that they can get to you more directly. So that's why they bombard. They'll still try and trigger you, trip you up, loads of allegations just to get some sort of a response from you. So be mindful of that. So yeah, so it's parallel parenting. And then my last one was see them for who they are. Be really honest and real about accepting the person that you are dealing with. So those are my tips.
They're brilliant tips. Thank you so much. I think that's so helpful. I love you pack so much information in, but it's absolutely brilliant.
Oh, sorry, someone's trying to ring, so I've declined.
So if you're happy, then what I'll do, we'll go into some of the questions. What I'll do the ones that have come through in the chat on here first, because obviously those people are here and kind of waiting, and then I'll go through a couple that came through on the app. Yeah. So I've had a couple again that came to all of us and a couple that came to me directly.
Okay.
So I've got one that says, how do you manage an ex-narcissist trying to control you through your child? So if they're breaking boundaries that you've set with your child and they're doing it deliberately to antagonize you, any advice from that person?
You have to kind of separate the home. So they'll do that loads. That, if I've understood this correctly, and sometimes it's hard to kind of understand what you mean, but I'm hoping I got this right. If you've set like a boundary about, no tech after 9 or something, and they do it in their own home, that's why you parallel parent, because they just won't stick to any boundaries or rules or house rules that you have in your home, and they'll deliberately do it also to appear more fun to the other child. Let go. You've got no control over that. There are some sort of legal things that you could do if you fancy going to court and sort of trying to get something in, but it's unlikely that it'll go through unless it's sort of a real safeguarding issue, like, letting the child out after 11 o'clock or something. But really, that's where you have to accept and let go. Keep to your boundaries in your home. You'll probably find it's quite difficult because the child will say, but when I'm at mummy and daddy's, I can do this, which is, again, just another layer of sort of, causing mayhem in your own home. The answer to that with the child simply is, yes, I understand that, and you're absolutely right. When you're with mummy and daddy, you have this rule, but in my home, it's this rule. That's creating a boundary for your child. Difficult, yes, but children love boundaries. As much as they moan about them, they do love them.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I hope, to the person that sent that to me, I hope that answered your question. What Nawal said earlier as well, so on the Frollo app, we do have different kind of group chats, and there is one for coping with narcissists. There's also ones around parallel parenting. So again, if parallel parenting is something that maybe a term you haven't heard before, there are kind of other supports you can get for that, and people that are going through the same process. I've got another question then. I'm about to start my divorce process soon, and I would like to go through it as amicably as possible. I want to keep communication with my ex professional and business-like and only focus on the matter in hand, whereas he wants to talk to me above and beyond and kind of whenever he feels like it. How do I keep him happy so I can get on with the divorce and focus on the issue at hand rather than, I guess, kind of drifting off onto another tangent that he might want?
Okay, so I'm going to guess that person is narcissistic, because otherwise you wouldn't be in this in this chat. So what worries me is the sentence, how can I keep them happy? You can't. And what I hear is fawning. Fawning is one of the sort of trigger responses that we have when we are faced with a narcissist. So there's the normal fight and flight responses that we're kind of aware of. Then there's the kind of do nothing and stand there. Then there's fawning, which isn't sort of heard about a lot. And fawning is complying. So when you ask me sort of how can I keep them happy? Well, you've got a choice there. It's basically saying yes to absolutely everything. And the minute you start to say no, they're going to react. You're not going to be able to have an amicable divorce with a narcissist. The only way that you can do that is by saying yes to every single choice. Absolutely keep your comms factual, less emotion, but you'll notice immediately when you don't answer the questions that they want you to answer, you're immediately entering into, I'm not keeping them happy. Yeah, so it's the answer is you can't do it. That's,
perfect, thank you. Yeah, I've never heard that term before, so that's really interesting.
Oh, what, fawning? Yeah. It's the fourth trigger response. Yeah.
So then I've got one. Can you go into more about communication with a covert narcissist? Mine is ignoring all legal letters about buying me out, and I feel like I'm completely stuck with boundaries around no contact unless it's specifically about the kids.
Right, so without knowing the full logistics of your case, if I had a client that was, in terms of finances, not getting any responses, that's a classic, by the way, technique by a narcissist to elongate the legal process. So it's litigation fatigue is what they want to give you, so that you're spending all your money basically with solicitors, number one. Number two, you're just exhausted by the process, hoping that you'll give up. If they weren't responding on something like finances, I would issue in court. There's only a certain number of times that you can sort of say, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this? And then the solicitor gives another deadline. And if they don't, you're going to have to threaten to issue legal proceedings. It doesn't, when you issue legal proceedings, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't still negotiate in the background. You can, but by setting off your legal proceedings, you are giving them somewhat of an incentive to kind of push on, because they know at some point they're going to have to give full disclosure, they're going to have to go to court, and the court is going to set those dates. So that's what I would do there. I hope that answered it.
Perfect, thank you. I've got them.
It's Claire. I've got a voice. Hello.
Hello.
When I was in that position, I was buying him out,
Right.
and he dragged it out and dragged it out and dragged it out, and we gave him a final date and a final offer, and we said, this is it now. If you don't do it, we're going to take you to court. And it took until he actually received the court papers to his solicitor to actually do anything.
There you go. Yeah, you do have to issue. You have to take that step. And I know it's quite frightening for some people, but you do actually have to do it. Sometimes you
don't believe you otherwise, unless you actually issue the court papers.
Yeah, no, you do. And that applies, actually. My answer also applies to children. It may mean that sometimes people think, well, if I'm the other parent, I don't need to issue a C100, the sort of children reside with me. But actually, when you're dealing with someone narcissistic, because they have a tendency to move the boundaries so much about, no, I'm not having them this weekend, and you need to give me another holiday, and they like to argue about Christmas and whatever, I actually encourage my clients to have a C100, just so your boundaries are clear. It minimizes the amount of contact that you have with them, because they will, by the way, still want to push the boundaries, and you have your contact arrangements in place with your children. And the phrase that I will give all of my clients, in the early days, is certainly, we'll just stick to the order. We'll just stick to the consent order. Sometimes you can have some flexibility with a narcissist. You know, they do maybe give you back a little bit, but it's almost through training them by you being relentless and sticking to the consent order that you then at some point in time have you know, that flexibility. And by the way, not all narcissists you know, need a consent order. I, for instance, do not have a consent order. I've always been able to sort of do that. So it kind of depends as well on the type of narcissist that you have. There are those narcissists that actually very minimum contact with the children, you know, are kind of very aloof with it. And there are others that are dogmatic about having them and wanting, you know, sort of 50% and sometimes even more.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Sorry, I've got so many questions. I'm trying to like scroll it and get
the number go up. I'm just like,
and then it bumps, and I'm like, oh god. So I've got on how. I've got how can you stop them grinding your gears? Like you said, they know how to play the victim, which is infuriating when what they're saying is just self-pitying or legal paper trails.
So the reason you find it just so is because, and that's a physical thing, isn't it? It's not even, there's not even a word for it, is because you're believing their narrative. Park it to one side. That's just their narrative in their world. Having been with someone narcissistic, like I was saying before, you almost think that their world is the world. It's not. They will play the victim mentality. They'll use allegations. Do not overly defend yourself is one of the key things I would say with a victim narcissist. It makes you look more guilty. Get rid of that desire or that need to have to defend yourself. The truth must out. It'll come out in the end, but don't chase it too much. Deal with yourself.
No, I think that's really good advice. I've got one, it's come to me privately and I thought it was a really interesting, I've lost it, there it is. So is it normal that they make you feel like you're the narcissist and you constantly question yourself, actually, am I the narcissist and they're not and they're normal? Yeah. And am I the one in the wrong? Is that normal?
Totally and utterly normal, absolutely 100%. So is the often questioning whether our own children are narcissistic. You just have this sort of sensitivity button attributed, and the mere fact that you question whether you are narcissistic means that you're not. Narcissists do not self-reflect. And yeah, it's one of the most normal things to do. And like I said, it doesn't just span yourself, but you know, you can very quickly answer those questions. The mere fact that you ask yourself, do you have you been with someone narcissistic, which means that you're not, because a narcissist and narcissist don't sort of work together, and just kind of analyze, you know, are you empathetic, are you a people pleaser, and you'll find that, yeah, you're not the narcissist. But we do often also, I find parents sort of start to question their own children, and be careful about that, especially with teens. There's a study that actually teenagers from the age of 13, I've said this a lot actually, from 13 to about 17 or 18 have zero empathy. So I get a lot of parents that sort of say, oh my God, I think my child is turning into my next. And it's like, no, they're just teenagers with loads of hormones. But yes, the answer fundamentally is it's absolutely normal to question yourself. And if you find that you are questioning yourself, it's highly likely that you're not.
No, I love that. I think that's really good advice. I've then got one that came through onto the app that says, how do I try and protect my child from their father's narcissistic tendencies? I can see him starting to treat them in the same way he treats me, and it's getting worse.
Yeah, so they will. Again, it's a bit like what I was saying about children and sort of their inability to love them in the same way that we love our children. And they'll essentially treat them in the same way as they treated you. Protecting them is very much centered around this word of empowering your children. And the reason it's quite difficult to answer this question in one fell swoop is because it really fundamentally depends on the ages of your children. It's quite difficult to help a sort of a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old. And the big things there are making sure that they feel heard, making sure that you sort of, you know, they can talk to mummy or daddy about anything that bothers them. As they grow up into sort of teenagers, that really is making sure that their emotional needs are met, always being there for them, and building up their ability to be able to talk to you about the other parent, or even the manner in which you operate. One of the biggest things I see to my clients is, if you don't stand up to the narcissist, why on earth do you think your children will? You know, I often get sort of parents that are saying to me, I don't know why he or she just didn't say to their mum or dad, you're bothering me, or you're upsetting me, or you're so selfish. I'm like, do you? Have you ever been able to stand your boundary with a consequence? I'm not talking about saying you're selfish. You don't have to use that language. It's just, have you demonstrated to your children what a boundary looks like and a consequence of that? If you haven't, then don't expect your children to be able to do it with the narcissist also. Go onto my website. There are some top tips there about languages to use with children also. I have a course going onto my website soon about children and narcissism, because it's such a big thing. But empower them to be heard for you, demonstrate and model that good behavior. Don't try and do all the work for them. They have to learn to stand alone. But again, it's so age dependent, but that's sort of a really high level answer depending on where the age range is.
No, that's great. Like you said, it's such a huge topic, isn't it? Within narcissism is then your children and that effect.
Yeah, definitely.
I've had a message then from one of the dads that is on the call, and says, so much of the discussion and the examples given are of a mother who has children and is dealing with a controlling or narcissistic partner that is the father. He said he's in a situation where he has a narcissistic ex-wife who has primary care of the children and makes it really hard to then for him to see his own children and how that relationship works. I guess any tips when it's maybe that way round as opposed to...
Yeah, so again, it's very much the same thing about empowering. And yes, I suppose if you haven't at least got 50% of the time, then you are sort of at a disadvantage in that way. Watch out for parental alienation. I would sort of look into sort of joining some groups. There are some great father groups to join in that position. And I have many clients that are in that position also. And I actually empowered those male clients. In fact, my last 3 wins, as it were, if you want to call it that, are of fathers gaining, you know, that 50%, even with children as young as 4. I don't know whether that's applicable to you, but empowering also means being there for them as much as you can, be really clear about your contact arrangements, and be the best parent that you can be in that situation. The minute you start to observe any indications of them reducing contact or affecting a relationship, then I would dive in and try and see if you can sort of have more time with them. That's, again, really high level without knowing the really finite details about your case.
No, that's great. Thank you. I think, yeah, like you said, a lot of them, unless you know the detail, it's quite hard to give a specific
high level. But no, I think the point is to that father is, you know, I help both men and women, and in both those scenarios, and in fact fathers that have, you know, minimal contact, or even have had sort of, you know, checkered pasts that are, you know, resulting from having been with someone narcissistic, and they are sort of slowly trying to build their lives back up again to have contact with their child. So I really do deal with a wide range of different scenarios.
I've then got a question from someone who says, prior to our separation, I was really close to all of his family, particularly his mum. We're now not together. She is trying to keep things friendly with me and when we see each other, but I'm finding myself currently fawning and kind of now trying to please him because I like the relationship I have with the family. I really love and miss the family. I don't know how to manage that alongside trying to separate from my narcissistic ex. Which I guess is that's a really hard one. Build your own relationship with that family without doing it via your ex.
You know, you stand alone in your relationship with them, and almost, I suppose, the narcissist, because they know you, they'll know that you'll have sort of this soft spot for their family, so it's just another way of kind of getting to you. One may argue that you have to almost be careful about that relationship also. It might be used against you, again, without knowing the full details of that relationship, but you're going to have to develop your own direct route to them without sort of going via the next. That's the best way to do it. But also always being on high alert about that relationship, you know, sort of just in case, just protecting yourself, mainly because blood is thicker than water.
Yes, I think that's really good. That's a really difficult situation to be in, isn't it? If that's what you're going through, it's really tough.
Yeah.
Then someone has said, is it very common for them to jump straight into another relationship soon after the split, even before, you know, kind of a split's properly established?
Oh God, yeah. God, during, they'll be married to you and jump to a new relationship. Yes. So there's often a reason for that. I mean, apart from the obvious, which is they need supply, they need that attention, but also it's a way of making you look like the crazy one. Look at me, I jumped into another relationship. I can't possibly be the problem. It must be you, is another reason they do that. They don't have the same emotional reactions about a relationship. So when sort of, you know, non-narcissistic people end a relationship, we're grieving, we're feeling lonely, we're questioning what happened, you know, we cry, we laugh, we spend time with friends. There's sort of so many different stages, you know, there's 7 stages of grief that you kind of go through. Narcissists don't have that because they don't have any empathy, and they never saw you as an individual. They weren't really in love with you. They were just using you for attention and supply. So it's almost like you're a robot and the batteries have fallen out and they're like, oh, you don't work anymore and you're not doing what you need to. I need to find something new. It really is like that. And that's what I mean about my sort of tip at the end, which was really start to accept them for who they are. And when you do, when you ask a question like, is it normal for them to jump into another relationship? You'll then go, yeah, of course it is, because I was nothing to them. I was just something that they used to satisfy their need. And their need is, imagine an empty bottle with loads of holes in it. And you keep pouring in all the attention that you're giving them, all the love, all the everything that you can do. And it's never enough. It's just endless. So that's why you end up by being completely exhausted. Another great blog to read on my website is The Narcissist and the Empath Dance. And it's a dance. You keep giving as an empath because you want to feel validated and loved, and it makes you feel good. And the narcissist keeps taking because that's what they need in order to continuously feel loved and full. So yeah, not a surprise. That's a short answer.
No, brilliant. I've then got, so how do you manage sharing things between both homes? Their dad often won't give things back, and I end up being stuck without the right school uniform, but then says that it's my fault. I think he keeps them as a form of control because then I have to contact him to get them back.
Yeah. Oh, the wonderful game that is clothes. So I talk a lot about transition things on my Instagram. You can go to the highlights, there'll be some things, but one of the big ones is sort of, you know, the bag that the children take. Again, depending on what sort of the timings are, is there any opportunity for the children to come back to you with the uniform so that they get changed before they go back to the parents? There's no discussion about uniform. Of course, they're probably keeping it. It's a way of control. It's actually a bit of a game. They probably find it quite funny that you're getting frustrated. And if there isn't an opportunity, then I would just enforce it. I would make it so that they ultimately have to come home because the uniforms keep getting missing, sort of keep going missing. Always have a spare just in case, but it's sort of having to tweak potentially the contact arrangements around there, but it's all part and parcel of the game. I mean, you know, I have learned, and actually my children have learned, you know, there's sort of certain clothes that they don't take because they never come back or they're forgotten. I've had school shoes couriered in 24 hours because they've been forgotten. You know, there's all of sort of that. I mean, it's not all narcissistic. Some of it is also just parenting, sort of, you know, the consequences of living in 2 separate homes. But when it is part of that game, you kind of have to look at whether there's any rejigging that you can do about clothing, even down to when they come back, looking, rifling through the bag and just saying, there's a jumper here that's missing, you know, things like that. But that's sort of, you know, some help there. But it's a classic technique or silly game that they like to play.
Yes, very frustrating one. There's then, oh, it's just gone again. Sorry, it's every time someone puts a comment, it like goes
I'm looking at the number going, wow.
You know. So I've got someone who's then said, what actually causes narcissism? Is it a learned behaviour and can it be unlearned?
No, it can't be unlearned because of personality. 2 major things that causes narcissism. So like I said, you're not born, it's not genetic, but it predominantly comes from 2 main things. Number 1 is a trauma event in your childhood, whether that be a parent dying, leaving, you know, some really big trauma that basically means it almost stunts your emotional growth. Yeah, you sort of almost stay childlike. The other thing is having a narcissistic relative. If the type of behavior that was modeled to you was that of a narcissistic one, not demonstrating empathy or, you know, all of those things, or taking responsibility, then that is your learned behavior. And that's why some of my clients sort of say, you know, when I was trying to talk to my next about, you know, what they were doing, they literally would look at me and go, what are you talking about? Like, there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. And they genuinely believe that. And they do, because that's how they've been raised. They think there's nothing abnormal about their behavior. And what they're developing also within all of that is just real sort of low self-esteem, that sort of, they don't feel loved because that narcissistic parent didn't love them. They've created this persona, this mask to protect them from the reality of everything. But yeah, that is, what's a C100 I've just seen? C100 is just a number for contact arrangements. Sorry, sometimes I speak like a lawyer. Yeah, sorry, C100 is the number on the form for contact arrangements for children. That's a C100.
But that's all of our children, isn't it? They are all being raised by a narcissistic parent, either one way or another.
Yes.
And they've all lost a parent. So does that mean that our children are at risk of being a narcissist also?
Yeah, there is potentially a risk, which is why I work a lot about empowering those children. You'll probably find, actually, because you're already on this journey, the reason that you're here today is because you identify exactly that the other parent is narcissistic. So you're already putting steps in place to manage your child, which means by modeling that behavior, by making them feel heard, because that's what happened to that narcissistic parent when they were a child. They weren't heard. Their emotional needs were not met. And by you doing that work with that child, you're reducing the chances of them being narcissistic.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Then I've got a couple. What's the time? I literally got time for a couple more questions. We won't be able to get through all of them because there are so many tonight. But we will try and do another session again so we can pick this up. But thank you so much for all of your questions. All your comments.
So much. It's lovely to see. I mean, I'm just seeing loads of kind of so I don't really want to make the kids. Oh, scared to get a court order, as then I'll be legally bound to make the kids go there even if they start not wanting to. Yes and no, depending on ages. If they're a bit older, actually, not necessarily. And sometimes you might find that if you get a court order, they actually don't want to see them. Again, it depends on the type of narcissist that you're dealing with. Sometimes they want to say, I want all of this time, and then they don't have it. And be careful of that sort of being held to ransom over that. You know, almost have to kind of challenge the practicalities of what that really means in the real world about that. In the same way, in the same way, by the way, if you have a contact arrangements order, it doesn't mean that he or she has to have them. Everyone thinks, oh no, you've got to have them, it's written down. No, they don't have to have them. If it's sort of as long as it's not shared residence anyway.
Someone's just messaged me privately and it says, we have a child arrangement phone contact order that's supposed to be 30 minutes long with an activity. In reality, my ex-partner, picks and chooses. So sometimes it's 15 minutes, sometimes it's 5 minutes. He seems to ignore what is in place and do whatever he wants. How can I manage that?
Does that mean that you want it to be 30 minutes?
I think so.
Right, okay, then that's okay, so I'm thinking that's from someone that is not getting their fair share of 30 minutes. That's the way I'm going to answer it. In which case, if you're not getting the 30 minutes that you want, that's a breach of your consent order. You'd have to send the normal correspondence, which is, I've noticed that increasingly so I'm not getting the 30 minutes as dictated in the consent order. Please can you make sure that this happens? If it doesn't, you have to say, and the consequence being, I'll have to seek an enforcement. And that's what you have to do. You have to build the boundary. Otherwise, you're just sort of, then nothing's going to change if nothing changes. So that's all about boundary and consequence.
Amazing. So I think that, like I said, there's loads of kind of questions. There's quite a few that lap over and are the same sort of thing. I didn't know whether you had any kind of little words of wisdom to leave us with, and maybe if you could just run through your website and your Instagram for everybody.
Yes,
Nawal,
yes. Yes, my sort of most active is I'm on Instagram, so that's at your_divorce_coach. As I said, I'm there daily on my stories, giving sort of everyday sort of contact. I do Q&A sort of sometimes once a week or every 2 weeks, and just talking about all the stuff that I spoke about today, tonight. And also so if you go into my Instagram, there's also links under the photograph, and there's a whole load of links to resources, to the 2 Facebook groups that I run. They're run by me. There's one female, there's one male, so you both feel safe. There are my blogs on my website that are there. Also in my Instagram, there are all these highlights of sort of past stories. I've collated them. I think my most recent is all about parental alienation. And there's all sorts, just kind of stream through those, and you get to watch me go on and on about certain topics. But, you know, yeah, the Facebook groups are quite good as well. There's loads of people talking. There's lots of activity every day. And sometimes I pop in there just to remind everyone. And my newsletter, if you go to my website, which is www.yourdivorcecoach.org.uk. If you type in your address, you get a free narcissistic dictionary. And what that is these sort of terminology of narcissistic words, you know, gaslighting, flying monkeys, all of these things that we think, oh God, what does that mean? And how do I explain it to somebody else? You get that free. But the great thing about putting your email address is you get all of my newsletters, all of my blogs, you know, just to sort of, again, keeping you informed, and any notice about workshops or working with me, or etc., etc.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Tonight's been absolutely brilliant. There's so much advice you've given, so many tips, so much you've shared.
You're very welcome.
And there's been loads of comments saying thank you, saying this has been really helpful.
Thank you. I'm so glad. Thank you all for sharing your evening. I know it's quite tricky when we've got children. The other thing I was going to say is, if you did want to work with me, drop me an email, and that's Nawal, Nawal, at yourdivorcecoach.org.uk. I give a free 15-minute discovery call just to sort of see, you know, talk about my services and how I can potentially help you, and sort of discuss the varying services between the sort of one-on-one and the SOS session. So if you're interested in that, sort of drop me a line also. But that last comment is one that I get all the time, and I've got to read it out. Sorry, I didn't hear some of this years ago. I do hear that quite a lot. It's like, why didn't I meet you years ago? I'm here now, so it's fine. I wish I'd met me years ago. It's the reason I do this, is because there was no one out there, and I just remember Googling behaviour that my ex-husband was doing, and then all this stuff sort of came. Someone said, please, can you write your email again? So I'm going to write it on here. Is that all right?
Yeah, of course.
I can't spell divorcecoach.org.uk. There you go. That's my email to come straight to me, and then my website. Sorry, Tam, I know you're going to do this anyway.
No, you're absolutely fine. Like I said, I'll pop it all when I post the recording on the app as well. I'll put her email, I'll put Nawal's Instagram, I'll put everything there so you can get hold of her really easily.
Yeah, and that's my Instagram there. There you go. So it's all on the chat, so everyone can copy it. But thank you all very much for your time and for being with us. What an amazing turnout. Fantastic. And thank you all for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to answer all of them. We might have to do this again, Tam. We say this every time we do this.
No!
We'll have to do it again.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a lovely evening. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.